Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what part of our globe you're logging in from. We're going to get started in just a minute or so. I'm going to allow just a few more minutes for other folks to arrive who might be a minute or two behind in calendar, especially since they might be coming in at very different times, depending on what part of the world they're in. So stand by, and we're going to get started with CRM in the C-suite in about 60 to 90 seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get us kicked off. I see one other person joined here. The session is being recorded, so you can reference it later. We'll provide a link to everyone who came. We're going to be talking about this idea of what we call CRM in the C-suite, and this is a partnership presentation by two organizations: Click Dimensions, the marketing automation solution for Dynamics 365, and C5 Insight. We are a Microsoft Dynamics implementation partner as well as a Click Dimensions partner. And we're put together a series focusing more on business value, business decision-making, project management, adoption, some of those really important issues around customer relationship management projects that aren't necessarily related to the technology and tweaking it, learning how to work with it, and those kinds of things, which is also important, but is more related to how do you get the right people engaged, and what does the right kind of engagement look like, and how do you put together a good roadmap? And so today is sort of our inaugural session along those lines. We're doing this repeat session. I actually presented this at Summit for those of you who were there. I believe it was in Houston in 2021, last fall. And it was called CRM in the C-suite. And it was one of the most popular sessions we've ever delivered, with some of the most highest reviews we've ever received. So we thought this would be a logical place to start. And we're starting with this idea of what is the role of the leadership team at the highest levels of an organization in the success of your customer engagement process. Now, the C-suite, the highest level of leadership, I will say, might look a little different depending on what size of an organization you're coming from. For small to medium-sized organizations, clearly the leadership should be the C-suite leadership that is actively engaged in this level of managing and participating in your customer relationship management project. But if you get into very large businesses, enterprises, Fortune 500 companies, that kind of stuff, then realistically, it might be directors or vice presidents or sort of one level down from the C-suite. While there might be awareness within the C-suite, more and more of this is likely to come from the next tier down in an organization. So great, pithy tagline saying CRM in the C-suite, understanding that's directional. That's not necessarily the absolute bottom line of where this needs to end up. I'm a big fan of saying adapt, don't adopt. So I'll share a lot of ideas such as a C-suite here, but recognize that you need to adapt what I'm talking about to your organization and your unique situation versus me taking an average of the dozens and dozens and dozens of organizations we've worked with over time and trying to put these into some high-level best practices for you. So the first thing to talk about here, by the way, is you may be here because either you're struggling with CRM or you're planning and you're concerned that you might run into struggles in the future, or maybe you've had some in the past and you're moving on from them, but you want to continue to refine. You're not alone in that. Here's a bunch of statistics about CRM failure. In fact, I read an article relatively recently, although it wasn't that recent of an article, it might have been a year or two old, where someone actually said they believe the failure rate is closer to 90%. Their gauge for CRM failure was, when I asked the C-suite, when I asked CEOs and high-level business leaders with organizations, are you getting the return out of your CRM investment that you expected? About 90% of them said, no, I'm not getting the kind of business value out of this investment that I expected to be getting. So You might define failure a lot of different ways, but that's a pretty succinct way of defining it. Some specific research that we did a few years ago suggests that these numbers are higher than they look here as well. That last little dot there that says 47% on the bottom of the slide, we'd actually done some interviewing of various different companies to find out, have you failed? Are you failing and struggling? And we also asked, how many times have you struggled so far? And what we found was nearly 50% of companies we talked to, and this is a number of years ago, said, we've tried 2 or more times and we're still not successful yet. So you look at these percentages and they happen to usually have to do with the current iteration of the project. But many of them are on their second or third iteration of struggle and failure before they get it right. So the struggle is real, it's challenging, and the role of the C-suite is incredibly important to the success, but it's not what you might think that role is. And so that's why I wanted to peel this apart a little bit and help folks who are either in the C-suite looking at this, trying to figure out what can I do to get the value out of this that I need to get, or those who are in project management roles or project leadership roles who need engagement from the C-suite and the right type of engagement, give you some helpful tips and best practices to try to get your C-suite engaged the way that they need to be engaged. So here's one of the things we found. CRM projects struggle in two different extremes. When a CXO, if you're not familiar with that term, that means any C-level executive, right? CEO, CIO, CFO, whatever. When they are the active leader of the project, or in project management parlance, when they are the owner, right? It's too much control, it's too much influence, it's too much time and priority from that level. They also struggle when the CXO just delegates the project and says, I'm stepping away, maybe I've approved the budget, but I'm playing almost no visible active role in this project whatsoever. So what does that mean? It sounds sort of like a damned if you do, damned if you don't. No matter what we do, this project's going to struggle. But that's not true. There is a balanced line between those two extremes, which is an effective role for the CXO to play, whatever C-level role they have in the C-suite. When the CXO influences the project in the right way, CRM can be much, much more successful. I used to think, by the way, when we had a CEO on the phone, right, as someone who's actively engaged in trying to win new client relationships, you always think, I want to engage with the C-level to help win this relationship. And I find when that C-level is too engaged, wants to not just influence, but is actually the one who's directing the steps and defining the processes, that is now a red flag. That is a red flag that we're going to struggle and the project might fail. But when I have the C-suite engaged and wanting to influence, but understanding they're not going to own all the details, that is a great flag. That is a great sign that it's going to be successful. It's going to reach the checkered flag. And on the other hand, it also succeeds when the CXO leads by using CRM. So part of this is, what's the role in delivering the project? Influence. But part of this, and almost no C-suite is good at thinking about this, is CRM now needs to become not just a tool for the front lines to use to do their jobs day in and day out, but it needs to become a leadership tool. In the leadership toolbox, every bit as important as ERP and regular executive meetings and Excel spreadsheets and all those different things. It comes right alongside that to help leaders have visibility, make better decisions, and communicate with their teams better. So it's really during implementation, which really never ends, and becoming a power user of the solution, some kind of user of the solution, is incredibly important. So influencing CRM and leading with CRM, that's what we're going to talk about in today's session as we get deeper into it. Quick introduction to me and to what to expect as you engage with us in the session today. My name is Jeff Abels. Again, I'm partnering with Click Dimensions today on today's session. I run a company that just celebrated its 20th birthday, actually. We all went to Charleston, South Carolina, and had a grand time having a birthday together as a company. And we deliver customer employee experience, digital customer employee experience solutions to folks. So that boils down to technology like Dynamics, like Microsoft 365, SharePoint, Teams, also things that have to do with customer experience related to that, like Click Dimensions and other solutions that take all that great data that's in Dynamics and starts to use that to create a better brand message, target customers better, give people value-added messages. I geek out on the stuff. I've been doing it for over 20 years. I've written a couple of books on the topic. I've kind of influenced one book that one of my colleagues has written. I was recently honored by being named a Microsoft MVP. So all that's kind of cool stuff, but maybe the more important stuff is my why, right? Why do I get motivated in the morning, and why do I geek out on this stuff, other than thinking that using digital to create broader and deeper connections with the people we exist to serve? Well, here's the people I exist to serve, my family. So we have 2 grown daughters. They've both gotten married. I used to say recently, but I guess not so recently anymore. We have our first grandson who just visited. He's 2 years old, and I needed to relax after spending a weekend with him, so I went back to work, because that was a lot less work than carrying around that little guy all weekend long. And in our spare time, we love to ride our motorcycle together. We love to enjoy fine spirits together. So would love to have folks check in with some of their bucket list items and hobbies and things that they enjoy, if you care to share that in chat. But that's a little bit about me, so you can know me a little bit better as a speaker. Now, as we get into the content today, I want you to feel free to chat your questions. If you have any questions you'd like to ask, feel free to put them in there. You can put it for everybody to see if you want to, or if you'd prefer, you can just put it out there for the organizers to see. We have some folks from Click Dimensions who are monitoring this, and we'll be able to ask some of those questions on the back end of this. So please feel free. If you have questions, put them out there. I'll see them pop up. I'm not so good at pausing to answer them when they pop up, but I'm definitely good at looking at them afterwards and spending a few minutes afterwards, even if it takes us into overtime, to answer them. And I find it very gratifying to know people are engaged enough to ask a few questions. So if nothing else, pay it forward by asking questions sometime during this, just so I'll see that you're paying attention. All right, so I promise this is our agenda, and that's what we're going to do. Very simple agenda. 2 ways that the C-suite can and should influence the CRM project. 3 ways the C-suite can and should create a leadership tool by becoming users of CRM themselves. Let's dive in. So for our 2 ways, the first one is, I talked about, here's my why. I'm a big believer in why, right? If you haven't gone and looked at the, I guess it's Simon Sinek's TED Talk on this, or read the book on it, I cannot understate the value of deeply understanding why you're doing the things you do, whether it's in your personal life or whether it's in business. And a CRM project is certainly no exception to that. So we're going to talk about it. And I'm going to warn you, by the way, when I get into that, everybody seems to go sort of a, yes, I acknowledge the importance of that, but we're kind of there. Let's move on to something more tangible. We engage in rescue projects all the time. I have never engaged in a rescue project where I didn't have to dive deeper into this and go further in the process of defining it. It's hard to say you've spent too much defining your why. In fact, I would say it's even a moving target. So it's not something you just do at the beginning of a project and forget about. It's something that nothing's changing faster than your customers, and you're learning new things all the time. You need to rethink why you're doing the things you're doing. So I'm stealing my own thunder from that topic, but I'll dive deeper into that. And then the other one is, you need to have a plan. But what does a plan look like? How is a Dynamics CRM or any kind of CRM plan different from a typical plan? And what role does the C-suite play in actually developing that plan? So I talked about why. When it gets right down to it, the C-suite kind of has 2 jobs, just 2 jobs. One is process, right? They need to figure out what the things are the organization needs to do in a consistent, quality, and scalable way. And the other job of the C-suite is exactly the opposite. It's change. How can they identify things that need to be done differently to grow or survive? So change is always high on the list of things that the C-suite say is priorities for them. And really recent events, all the changes going on in our environment due to all sorts of things over the last couple of years has pushed the need to adapt the change even higher. So it seems to be accelerating. So understanding the why and doing that on a changing basis, unbelievably important. Now, what Jane McConnell found, Jane McConnell is known for looking at the digital workplace, doing a lot of research on it, and being an expert with it. One of the things that Jane McConnell's research found was, whoops, I think my slide just advanced. Sorry. There it is. Maybe it'll pop up there again. Are these top 5 drivers for successful digital workplace change? And I'm sorry, that slides, this must be on auto advance. I'll kind of keep going back to it as I talk about it. So the number one thing she found, which goes back to what I'm about to talk about, is a sense of why. When organizations do a great job communicating their sense of why, they have much more effective results from their change management initiatives, in particular around digital workplace, which of course CRM is right at the hub of digital workplace change. Now the other ones are related to that. I believe the second one is marketing communications, which a big part of marketing communications is taking that why and communicating it, because marketers will tell their leaders all the time, no one hears your marketing message until they've heard it at least 7 times, right? It doesn't sink in. It's not truly heard and understood until they hear it multiple times, and some would say as many as 21 times. Then the next on the list, by the way, is executive leadership. So that plays an incredibly important role in people changing. And then peers, right? What are my peers doing? That's going to affect me. And then lastly, managers. So if you're a manager, bad news, you are the least influential individual in your organization for driving change. Your best hope is to influence your executives because they're going to influence change, and to find people below you who will change one off and influence their peers. All of this gets to, we need to understand the why to have that level of influence and make that happen. So find your why or you'll lose your way, right? I have so many clients I've engaged with who share stories that sound kind of like this. You know, we knew we needed CRM. Maybe our competitors were doing it, or people were coming in from outside who'd used it elsewhere. We got demos that were so exciting. We saw the cool dashboards. We saw the integration that would make people more efficient. And so we deployed it, right? And we set out, you know, it was our boat, right? And we set out to sail on our boat. And at some point, we found ourselves in the middle of the ocean, and we started saying, we're not getting the results we need. And we started looking around and realizing, we never really knew what results we needed. We just kind of got excited about it, and it was a cool tool and a great demo, and we got to work. But this thing doesn't have a GPS. It's not telling us where to go. And we try to do the processes that are built into it. Well, those don't necessarily fit with our business. And now we're in the middle of the ocean, and we're lost at sea, right? You see the ship there, lost at sea. When you're in the middle of the ocean, if you've ever been on a boat, one thing I can tell you is no matter which way you look, it's all straight ahead. There's no difference. You have no roadmap. You have no guideposts. You don't know what will lead you back home unless you've got the right compass or GPS to get you there. And why is what keeps you on course. Defining that up front and continuing to define it will help you find your way. So here is one simple example of why. Very, very important, and a lot of people go right by it. A lot of leaders, I've literally had leaders say, don't give me rainbows and unicorns and kumbaya stuff. I just want to get work done. And I'm sympathetic. I'm kind of a numbers guy. I get that. But I can also tell you, doing these few small things, they're about trajectory. What I mean by that is, you might feel like what I'm about to describe is a small thing, but it's a small thing to point this way versus point this way. But if I add 2,000 miles to that difference in direction, I'm either going to Vancouver or I'm going to San Diego. My destination is radically different. And that's what your why is. It's a trajectory that's setting something that feels small and subtle on the front end, that when you look at it over a longer term, it has an absolutely critical bearing on the outcome. So this is how a lot of companies start their CRM. They put a team together. Maybe they have a steering committee. Those are good things. Maybe they've got a project plan, and they call their CRM project something. And it usually just defaults to the name of a piece of technology or the CRM project or something like that. What I can tell you is that communicates, this is a tech project. This isn't about the business. This is about doing a thing called CRM. Well, CRM in its best course is not a thing. It's not a what, it's a how, it's a philosophy, it's a way of doing business. So when organizations take the time to think about their why, they come up with things like this. I'm not prescribing. Remember, adapt, don't adopt. They might say, this is a customer engagement project, or this is a pipeline acceleration project, or this is a service improvement project, whatever it is. But what they're starting to talk about is, this is a project about the business, about business outcomes, about taking ourselves to a new place. It's not about, hey, I signed off on a piece of technology and everybody better adopt it. Well, what if that technology is configured in a way that is counterproductive to people getting their jobs done? Is that really what we want? That might still happen with this definition. But if I come back and say, hey, boss, this customer engagement project is actually causing friction with customers. I'm not getting done this big picture that's reflected in the name. I can say, I've got something to stand on to talk about to help improve this thing, getting me to those business outcomes. But if I just go back and say, hey, the CRM project is making me slow down or something like that, well, maybe it's good that you slow down. Maybe a little slower for you will be faster for the rest of the business. And I don't have as much of an argument to stand on. Again, small feeling change in trajectory, big change in where you go. CRM tends to feel like this is a technology project run by technologists. Whether those technologists are inside of your company or whether those technologists are at a partner company doesn't matter. If it feels like this is technology for technology's sake, you're going to wind up with a bunch of technologists doing exactly what they're told to do, which may or may not have anything to do with what your users and your business actually need to be more successful. And then ultimately, you want to have more of business guided, maybe trusted coach. Technology should be engaged and involved, but it should not be in a leadership position. And I know some folks may differ from me in that opinion. I have many clients who say IT just owns this project because it feels like technology. And I humbly disagree with IT being the owner, but I heartily agree that IT should be strongly partnered with them, both internal and external. So what is your why? Now, this is a broad why, but as we spent a lot of time researching this over the years, we realized there were 5 things that organizations that are successfully implementing customer relationship management projects are doing that are different from those who are struggling. And remember, this is about subtle differences, right? So it's easy to look at all those and go, well, we kind of do that. What I can tell you is the folks who are successful take a very hard look at all 5 of these things and say, how are we making our company better at these 5 things through this project on an ongoing basis with a lot of rigor? They may not call them this, but I find it helpful to break it down into this simple pattern. So think of it as a luck principle, right? They're serious about, we want to listen to our customers and to each other better than we ever could before. That's what this project is partly about. It's about actively listening, remembering, writing things down in our brain. And our brain now is a corporate memory. It's called the database behind CRM. That's how we remember what we're hearing when we're listening. And listening is multifaceted. Yes, it's your sales and customer service teams actively listening to customer conversations. It's also your marketing team listening to how are people responding to those email broadcasts and SMS messages and other messages that we're putting out there. And how are we actually seeing the results in terms of changes in our accounting data? Well, that means we have to actually have integration to listen carefully. Listening is not simple, but it's really important. Then they understand. That's the analytic step, right? Stephen Covey's famous for saying, a problem as human beings is not that we don't listen. It's that we listen with the intent to respond rather than with the intent to truly understand. And a big part of a customer relationship management project is saying, we want to deeply understand our customers as a result of this. And by the way, we want to also deeply understand our own people who interact with the customer all the time. So understanding, absolutely critical. It's a big analytical step to put all of that information together. Then, on that foundation of listening and understanding, you can build better connections. And better connections has a lot to do with processes. It's not just hiring people who are good connectors. It's business processes that we can repeat things that we know work again and again and again. And it's also relevance. It means as we have more and more knowledge about our customers, those marketing messages that are coming out of awesome solutions like click dimensions are more relevant to our customer than they ever would have been before, right? So you start to get the sense that it is a philosophy and it's about a partnership with our customer, not about managing our customer. That's probably why Microsoft started calling it customer engagement instead of customer relationship management, because you really need an engaged customer, right, to make this work 2 ways. And then we know what our results are. We're constantly looking at and measuring everything. How many clicks did I get? How many opens did I get? How many purchases did I get? How many comments did I get? How many new deals did I get? How many new items entered into the pipeline? Tons of ways you can know what your results are. And when you know what your results are, you can continuously improve. And that's absolutely what good customer relationship management is all about. So listen, understand, connect, and know. That's your why. Now, at the bottom of it is your why of whys, right? We call it good luck. So listen, understand, connect, and know. That is what you do. Good luck. That is who you are. So remember, I said CRM is somewhat of a philosophy, and you may not get your C-level team there right away, but it's a philosophy around how we actually do business. Remember, I said these are the 5 things that those who struggle less do well versus those who struggle more. The more of them you do, the less you're going to struggle. So you may not have everybody on board with saying, hey, we exist to serve a customer. This helps us serve a customer and to serve each other a little bit better. That's your why, right? That's your good luck. If you're not there, okay. But I can tell you, if you are there, you start to look at the other 4 things differently, because it goes from being about generating results, which is incredibly important, to who we are. And that's a whole different conversation. Now you don't need to kind of have process and procedure so much because you've institutionalized a culture, and CRM becomes a tool people go to help execute on that vision that the organization has laid out for them. So we call organizations who do that well, organizations that are powered by luck. Now remember, adapt, don't adopt. You don't want to show up to your executive suite tomorrow and go, I've got it. Our why is powered by luck. Even if you explain everything I explained, that's going to be a lot to explain. They're going to get glassy-eyed. But look at that and know that these are the more detailed things underneath your why that you want to accomplish. And of course, feel free to share it when the time is right. But come up with a shorter why in terms of project name than that. But you're going to need to get into details underneath that why at many different levels. Okay. So again, I'm going past that now, but I'm telling you, if you walk away from this session with one thing, that's the best thing. You can power off now, and I can tell you everything else you'll probably look at and go, hey, that's a little more applicable to us. But the why is the number one thing, again and again and again, and run into it. But number two is, so what's the plan? How are we going to have a plan to execute this project, and what role does a C-level take in putting this kind of plan together? So first of all, I would say planning is incredibly important. It looks different for CRM types of projects and a lot of classical development planning or business planning or something like that. Legacy kind of task first planning versus people first planning is a little bit different. But what I can tell you is so many organizations are trying to get to transformation by paving potholes. And I can tell you from having done more than half of our projects as recovery projects, you're never going to go to a superhighway by paving potholes. And what I mean by that is if you buy a system and then you start fixing all the little problems that people complain about with the system, there's a time and place for that, and you need to pave potholes for sure. But if you really want to go to a transformative way of doing business, you got to create the superhighway for people to get on eventually. And that requires a plan. That requires engineering. That requires good architecture and planning and foresight. So does the C-level have a role in that? Yes, but that role is not owning it. So ideally, if you've got a good project management team and or a really good partner, there will be a very business-focused portion of planning. And in fact, it will be an annual planning cadence. That is the perfect time for the C-level to get involved. Not involved in the entire process, but the way we see it, if I describe it briefly, and I do a whole separate session on how to do roadmaps and annual plans for CRM, but if I describe it briefly, upfront and then again on a regular recurring basis, probably annually, you get together, usually starting with the leadership team, whatever that is. Maybe it's the C-suite, maybe it's just below that. The leadership team, you get a general overview of priorities and vision and that kind of stuff. You have some specific questions, you put stickies on the wall and that kind of stuff. Then you meet with line of businesses. Sometimes you'll even meet with process groups. Sometimes you'll do ride-alongs. Always you should do, by the way, benchmarking types of surveys that look at both your culture, strengths and weaknesses, and how you need to understand that to drive better adoption, as well as satisfaction and importance of different features, functions, so you can understand the gap to decide what to improve. Then you bring that C-suite back together at the end of it and go, here's what we heard from you. Here's what we heard from the entire team. Here's how everybody prioritized everything. Now you help us to prioritize this the way the C-suite sees it. And you go back as the project manager, leader, business analyst, solution architect. You influence them. Hey, we heard what you said, leadership team. However, you want these awesome business intelligence reports as your highest level priority. And there's lots of data work that needs to happen before that can get done. So we're going to recommend that you put that into phase 2 or phase 3 or whatever it is. So you've engaged with the C-suite, they've engaged with the project. They haven't gone through all the detailed process design and all that stuff that you've done with all the other lines of business and process groups, but they've given you their vision. Then they've seen the tactical details, and then they've weighed in on the overall priorities, and you can go back and share that with the rest of the team. So high level, but incredibly important to do that kind of thing. Lots of moving parts. In the presentation I give one, I think I have one slide that lists something like 30 or 40 different tools you can use for planning, depending on how big and complex you are and that kind of stuff. But ultimately, you at least want workshops with leadership, workshops with lines of business, and some level of survey to capture feedback from everybody, not just a representative sample in your workshops. Okay, so that's engaging on the front end. That's helping with the planning. And remember, I kind of talked about that is all on an ongoing basis, right? The why, that's probably going to change and evolve. If you start out with customer engagement, that might be fine. But in year 3, you might be focused almost exclusively on improving what you're doing with marketing. And that's okay. Then you need maybe a slightly different why, a slightly different project name or sub-project name for that. And then, of course, planning is not a one and done thing. Nothing is changing faster than your customers. Microsoft's changing systems all the time. Click Dimensions and others are adding new features and functions all the time. You need to be aware and have a plan for leveraging all those different things. So that's all ongoing. That's not one time. But also ongoing is this next piece, which might be more important, and that is, how is your leadership team engaging with the tool to become users of the tool, consumers of the knowledge from the tool? And maybe that's a better term than user. I think ultimately user is really kind of where you want to go, but it may not be practical in every situation. At the very least, they should be consuming knowledge from the tool, making decisions with that, and making it highly visible that they're actively doing that. That will have a huge impact on the success of your project, not just because leaders are making better decisions, which is important, but it's communicating something to the troops that's going to create better followership and adoption by doing that. So what are 3 specific ways that you can look at to help your leadership engage in using CRM as a leadership tool? So when you look at the top things the leadership folks think about all the time, I went through a bunch of different lists available from different publications. These 3 things are at the top of almost every leader's list. And I kind of mentioned at least one of them before. One is people. Always concerned about people, right? It may not always seem that way because sometimes leaders have to say, I don't care what people think. I got to make tough decisions sometimes that people don't like. But I can tell you from working with a lot of leaders, every leader that I've worked with cares pretty deeply about their people. They take people's careers seriously. They take people's income seriously. They really want to have a place where it's a great place to work. People have that as a better option than other options available in the marketplace. And then there's people that are customers too. Then there's change management. Talked about that. I'll talk about it more. And of course, there's revenue. And by the way, these tend to be kind of in the order that leadership thinks about them. The only time revenue becomes more important than these other 2 are when there's not enough of it, right? When they're losing revenue, when they're having losses, or when because of their situation, it might be put in a position of a hostile takeover if they don't make a change in something. But ultimately, they tend to care about the first 2. And if they do a good job of that, the third one never needs to become the top priority. So how does a customer relationship management project, regardless of which product you're using, by the way, help leaders to be better leaders with each of these things? So let's talk about people first, and really 4 categories of people that leaders think about. The first one is themselves, right? The leadership team itself. Then next tier down is the management team. Then the front lines people, who we kind of think of, oh, well, they're the main consumers of CRM. I beg to differ. I think that that's in balance with these other ones. And then there's customers, the people that CRM kind of exists to serve, right? Don't forget customers when you're talking about customer relationship management. So as leadership thinks about these 4 different roles, here's what I've seen successful leaders do to get more traction with every single one of these roles. First of all, use the project, use CRM management to create a next level of leadership. Those managers who actually own the project, right? Don't you own the project as a leader, but find among your managers that person or people who are ready to own something, who are ready to move it forward. They might need mentoring from you. They might need involvement and engagement from you. All of those are okay, but try your hardest as the leader not to have to be the owner of the project. Use it to help groom somebody who can become a leader in the future. And then remember I talked about luck and good luck. One of the really cool things about CRM is it helps you to identify some of the cultural gaps that you have, right? We all have this idea of the culture we want to have, but then there's the culture that we actually have. And there's always this gap between the present and this perfect vision. And that's what a vision is about. It's about a thing you can keep running towards and never quite reach it. But CRM starts to give you some tools to look at to say, how can I close that gap? How can I help people understand the why better than they've ever understood it before, so they can be empowered to do things they never could do before? How can I do that? How can I use these surveys I'm doing to understand my culture deeply and then build in things into this process that helps me to create an even better culture than I had before? CRM is an amazing opportunity to do that better. And then I've already kind of talked about this group a little bit because I said leaders should delegate the ownership of the CRM project to management. But remember, customer-facing managers also not only should own it, whether they own it or not. I have found the best managers, the best people who are managing the users of CRM are themselves not only a user of CRM, but are a power user of CRM. I've met a lot of managers in companies that are struggling with CRM adoption, and not just Dynamics, who really kind of think of it as a, that's a tool for my people, right? Like they enter stuff into it and they use it to look stuff up, but I'm a manager. I just need to run management reports. Maybe I get them out of the accounting system. Maybe I tell my people to put them into Excel. That's a horrible idea. Unfortunately, a lot of managers still do it. The best managers go, I'm a power user. I can get in there. I'm not a configurator. I'm not the system administrator. That's going too far to the other extreme. But I'm someone who can go in there and say, I understand my pipeline. I understand my customer satisfaction ratings. I understand how to send marketing promotions to a combination of leads and contacts and to measure results on the back end of that. I understand how to create my own charts and my own dashboards to suss that information out of it. And yes, I understand there's limitations on what I can do, but I understand it well enough to know that when I run into those limitations, I know how to communicate my needs so that the implementation team can put the technical people on it who can close that gap for me. I can't underestimate how important it is for your managers of CRM users to themselves be power users, to use CRM as a tool to absolutely do their jobs better. I do another session, by the way, called CRM for sales meetings or something like that. I can't remember the exact title. We spend a lot of time talking about your entire sales meeting should be run by CRM if you have CRM, but it's not as easy as just opening it to a default dashboard. You need some accompanying tools and stuff like that. So use it to run all of the meetings of the people who do their jobs through CRM. Very important. Then you've got your front lines, right? And there's some things that are a little bit beyond obvious with the front lines. I won't do the total obvious stuff. First of all, for the first time when you have CRM, usually everyone can have a number who's on the front lines, right? A number that you can look at in almost real time. So I call those numbers SQAGs, not BHAGs, but SQAGs, small, quickly attainable goals, a number that they're in 100% control of, but you can monitor on a weekly basis easily to say, how are we doing? Some people call those KPIs, but I think people call KPIs almost any metric now. So I like SQAG a little bit better, but everyone has a number, and not everyone has a dashboard of numbers. That's a lot to throw at people, but they have a number. We're going to focus on this number for the next 6 months. Maybe it's customer satisfaction. Maybe it's number of calls that you've made. Maybe it's number of new deals added to the pipeline. Maybe it's number of campaigns we're able to execute. I don't know what it is, but for you, you need to figure out the number, and now you have a way to look at it and create a conversation around it. So that's one huge thing. The other huge thing that leaders do to help impact the project is they say, there are a lot of things my people do today that they don't need to do. We don't need to have our people do things that a robot can do for them. I've had clients literally say, as we're doing recovery projects, I feel like I exist to serve this thing instead of the other way around, right? I thought that CRM was going to be a tool for me, but really I'm keying and rekeying data into so many different systems. That's a big part of my job. And that doesn't need to be a big part of anybody's job. Robots can do that, right? Not physical robots, but automation and stuff like that can do that. Take that off of folks, not only because you want to make them more efficient, but you want to unleash them to do things that only humans can do. But instead, you're strapping them to these day-to-day reactive processes that are mind-numbing, that drain away innovation, and that drain away humanity, frankly. The most valuable resource you have are the people you're paying a salary to. And if all they're doing is work that you could automate, that's a huge waste of that resource, and it's a disservice to the people that you exist to serve. And I'm not talking about automating people to get rid of jobs. Some of that happens a little bit. I'm not a believer that that ever really happens in general. I think people just retool for things. But I think we need to focus on training our people to become proactive, innovators, creative, decision makers, problem solvers. AI is miles and miles and miles away from doing that for almost anybody for a long time. But instead, when we're strapped into a reactive mode, our mind isn't free to do that stuff. So it's not easy because we got to train people to think differently too, but it's a worthwhile cause and it makes our company so much better. And then lastly of these four, of course, are customers. So one of the things that effective executives do with this is instead of going to ERP to ask customer questions, they go to CRM. Now, they may log into CRM if they're a really engaged leader, but at least if they're used to saying, I need reports before I make this decision, they start to understand, I need reports from CRM every bit as much as I need them from ERP. Because look, ERP systems, those are a rearview mirror, right? All that an ERP system tells you is what happened in the past, right? How many invoices got sent out, how many things got paid, how much stuff did we sell in the past, all those things. Incredibly important stuff, but it's all about history, not about the future. CRM solutions start to tell you things about what's in the pipeline right now. What are we going to meet with to talk about customers next? What are those upcoming campaigns that we've got planned for people? All of those things start to become much more predictive and much more proactive ways to influence outcomes than just looking at past history. So very important system to go to ask those numbers, to look at for those numbers. And again, not only just ask questions, build them into your meetings, right? Just like management builds them into meetings, what are our core metrics? What does the CFO need to know to make better financial and operational decisions? What does the COO need to know? What does the head of sales and marketing need to know? What do all those people need to know that can come out of the system? So now they start to go, is this number right? What's going on behind this number? Let me dig into that in a little bit more detail. When that happens 2 or 3 times, the people who are using CRM start to realize it's really critical. I do my job well in CRM, so I can influence good decisions being made across the organization. All right, change management, topic that's very near and dear to me. And here's why. I think from my experience, in fact, working with a German-based company called Adair, ADAIR.app, that focuses on helping organizations drive adoption and change, that this quote is absolutely true. The ability to change will be the most critical corporate capability in order to survive in the 21st century. So I think the 20th century and into the 19th century was defined by almost lack of change, right? We created these almost unnatural systems. Nature changes all the time, right? But humankind created these unnatural systems where it was manufacturing and process and all. I'm not saying that's bad, unnatural, but I'm saying that that century and some of the time before was about doing things routinely again and again and again to drive down cost, to drive up productivity, and it delivered some amazing things to humanity as a result. But we've reached the point of diminishing returns with that, if not having gone past it. The next century is going to be defined much more by relationships and knowledge and the ability to adapt rapidly to things that are changing. So yes, we need to keep doing some things again and again pretty well, but if you can't adapt, if you can't change, you're not going to grow and you may not survive whatsoever. And CRM is an incredible tool for helping organizations to adapt or even predict and then adapt to change. Here's a couple of examples. Think about this as a 2x2 grid, right? You have customers and you're either pursuing brand new customers or you're doing work for existing customers. And you have your products and services, and you're either developing brand new products and services or you're working with your existing services. This is a classical business decision-making 2x2 grid, right? If you look at that new quadrant down here, what you're really talking about is a whole new business, right? On developing a new product, but it appeals to a completely different customer too. So it's really a new business, right? I've got to develop a whole new customer list and marketing program, as well as a product and service. If I'm selling existing products and services to existing customers, that's kind of my cash cow. Like, yes, I need to do that. I can do that very, very, very efficiently. But here in the outliers, in the edges, that's where you're adapting to change most quickly, right? You don't usually go down to the new quadrant to adapt to change. Instead, you're constantly reaching out into here to say, how can I do new things for my existing customers? Or how can I take the existing things I'm doing and find new customers that those things work for? So what does that mean? What are some practical examples? Practical example number one is a bank. This was a division of a bank, and this case study goes back to pre-COVID. Maybe we'll start talking about years as PC, pre-COVID years. So this bank division was a business-to-business commercial lending. More complicated than that, but that's all I can disclose about it at this point. So they had a very carefully managed pipeline. And by the way, they weren't using Dynamics, but the same thing could be accomplished with Dynamics. Very carefully managed pipeline and process. And they saw a slowdown coming months before most others did, right? Because others were just dealing with we look in the rearview mirror and we want to do 10% better this year than we did last year, and everyone kind of manages their pipeline on their own. These guys were looking at it going, we're watching our pipeline trends, and our pipeline trends are dipping. Something's happening in the marketplace that's changing, and we need to respond. So they pivoted their product to appeal to their existing customer base a little bit more. So they said, let's take some products, do new products, and focus them on our existing customer base. Now, they still got hit. A downturn did come. They got hit. They had no layoffs whatsoever. They had some slowdowns. The revenue slowed down some. The hit was much more painful for their competitors, even within their own bank. This was a division of a very large bank. And other divisions within the bank didn't fare nearly as well because they weren't prepared. They weren't agile. They didn't change because they couldn't predict the need to change until it was too late to do anything about it. Now, this is another one that's actually based on COVID. This is a professional services regional accounting firm. And one of the things that they did was when COVID hit, overnight their pipeline changed, right? All of a sudden people said, cut every bit of discretionary spending we possibly can. And a lot of that had to do with especially the consultative area of some accounting practices. So they saw that coming and they took a close look at their own database. They had a very engaged team in pursuing opportunities and watching what was going on in the pipeline. And they found that there were a few industries that were actually going against the others during COVID, right? All of a sudden they were saying, we have a demand for more services because we need help in some key areas to get through these challenging times. So they took all of their efforts, sales and marketing efforts, and they focused them on these demographics, these segments that were actually seeking out their services. And they actually flourished in the early days of COVID when everyone else was looking at them trying to just stay alive and not have too severe of a cuts. They actually became a case study for other professional services accounting firms to say, what did you do? How did you do it? Because we're struggling. Now, about a year and a half into it, that turned around for almost all of them. But for these folks, it actually became a positive experience for them in terms of revenue, growth, and opportunities for their employees. So just two simple examples of when an executive team is engaged in CRM and is asking the right questions, you can respond to the need to change much more quickly than others can. In fact, according to this information from Harvard Business Review, organizations where leaders, defined as executives and managers, use digital workplace tools as leadership and management tools have 10% better revenue growth than those who don't. So, and of course, CRM is a digital workplace tool. So when your leadership team is saying, digital is not just something that I'm saying the younger generation or the front lines or managers or whatever, they're saying, this is a tool I'm learning to use to run my business better as well. You actually experience 10% better revenue growth, but only 19% of organizations fall into that category. 81% still struggling with that. What's the differentiator? The ones who are doing well have a digital coach. So they've got the right people helping executives to say, I need to come up this learning curve. Don't walk into the executive suite tomorrow and say, I'm going to be your digital coach. But effectively, they need somebody inside or outside of the organization, somebody who can help them understand that these tools can make them a better leader, and here's how they can make them be a better leader. The other thing they have that usually that digital coach is helping with is a very clear digital vision. Right? I talked about having a plan. That's what a digital vision is. They have a plan. How am I getting there? They're not just going to get a month of coaching and now they're a digital leader. They've got a long-term plan to get the company to a new place. And then the last area is revenue, which is good. About 10 minutes left. I think we're doing good on time. So of course, revenue is very, very important to organizations. A lot of executives spend a lot of time thinking about how to improve it. But here's the formula I run into in a lot of organizations that they're implementing CRM as a way to address revenue goals. They say, we've got great people. We've engaged in trying to bring in great people over time. We've got great people. We've got great people in our marketing department who know how to do branding and do tactical messaging and to do digital campaigns and do physical campaigns and develop partnerships. We got great people in customer service who know how to serve the customer proactively as well as reactively. And we got great sales reps who understand our product and know how to get our customers excited about it. We got great people. And that little diagram over there actually comes from a book, The Challenger Sale, that talks about the different personas of people that you might have out there. So we got great people. And now we've bought great technology too, right? So our great people have technology at their fingertips that they've never had before. So they're thinking the formula here is we've got our great people. We've signed the lease to buy the great technology. Maybe we've even signed the lease to have someone configure it with us. So people plus technology, that's going to give us luck, right? Lowercase luck, not powered by luck like I talked about earlier. So what's missing with this formula, right? We've taken our great people, we've invested in technology. What's so often missing is the third thing we always talk about, right? We always say it takes people, process, and technology. And oftentimes, very little work has been done into truly understanding the current state business process, truly understanding the future transformative state you aspire to, and setting up a pathway to get you there and constantly navigating it. So people plus process plus technology, serious looking at your processes and saying, how do we do them better? How do we do them faster? How do we have better information in them? How do we make them better for our people, better for our customers? How do we look at it that way instead of saying, let's take this old thing that's not working very well and let's just move it over into a new environment, and now we'll do the same things we've always done, but with a new environment. That might be a step, but that is certainly not the end in mind. And your planning has to take into account that future state that you want. So in the middle of this, by the way, you see listen, understand, connect, and know again. One of the things we found is you define your processes is for every step of the process you want to think about, how is this helping me listen to the customer better? How does this help me deeply understand them even more so I can make better decisions? How is this making me create better, more relevant, deeper, longer lasting, more value-oriented connections that my customers will keep the door open to be able to continue to come through? And how will I know how I'm doing so I can continuously improve this process I've developed? One of those books I mentioned at the onset of this was developed by a coworker of mine who's developed some of this process. Her name is Tricia Desso-Cox, and it's called Revenue Engineering. And I'll tell you what, if anyone wants to take my contact information at the end of this and send me an email saying, I want that Revenue Engineering book, whoever does that, the first couple of people, and if you're watching this recorded, first couple of people I even get from the recording, I'll do this, I will send it to you complimentary. But you can always go get it on Amazon. It's not very expensive. It's a paperback book, and it's a great way to think about the sales process type of design. Now, I mentioned this earlier, right? This idea of stop asking your ERP, CRM questions. I also mentioned this idea of everyone has a number, and that number is a small, quickly attainable goal. Dead serious about that. When companies take that seriously, it's a great way to permanently change behavior. There's a way to do it though, and ideally it's not the executive saying, here's the behavior we want, here's a metric, I'm going to monitor it, go do it. Ideally, it's executives engaging in a conversation with managers and frontline users saying, look, here's the big numbers we need to get as a company. We all agree, or whether we agree or not, they just are, right? It's revenue, it's net profit, it's EBITDA, it's whatever it is, it could be customer satisfaction. And now, what are the behaviors that you team think drive these numbers? What's the number of calls I make a week? It's the number of visits I make per week. It's whatever it is. So now your front lines are engaged in the conversation to say, here's the number I think is most important that we can impact now. And that's their small, quickly attainable goal. They've set the goal themselves. They monitor the goal themselves. Remember, peer-to-peer, incredibly powerful motivator for changing behavior. Now you're creating roundtables where people are engaged in it. If you're not there, it's not as simple as that, right? You've got to begin to change the way people think if you want them actively engaged in that process. But if you go on that journey, it's a great destination to have. It might be multiple years. You might start top down. You might have a lot of missed attempts with a wrong metric, but eventually you fundamentally change the way your business is running. So it starts running itself more instead of having to be as much of a top-down organization. Another area I've seen leadership do a great job with is now taking those numbers. Remember I said, don't just do ERP. So ERP numbers are really around your cash flow, right? Cash flow tends to be a rearview mirror thing. Some people forecast it, but their forecast is usually something like, here's what we did last year. Here's kind of what we forecast for this year, right? We want to improve. So here's what we did last year. Here's what we want to improve for this year. But if you can start to look at your CRM system to say things like, well, now we can look at our pipeline and we can build that into a future-facing forecast. So we have our budget laid out by month. We have our salaries laid out by month. We have our work in progress and open contracts laid out by month. And we have our pipeline laid out by month. And we have the things that influence that pipeline, like marketing that tends to result in things dropping into the pipeline. So we have our budget for what we think that will contribute. When I've seen organizations start to do this, they make much better decisions than they ever did before. Remember the bank and the accounting firm I mentioned earlier, but they're also sending a message to everybody in the organization that you are contributing numbers. The work you're doing is contributing numbers that's resulting in decisions we're making across the entire organization. And those decisions are better than they've ever been before. And now as a result, we're all talking about this and we're improving the quality of the work we do and the data we enter to make better decisions and have better numbers in the system. Okay, so when your project is in flight, these are 3 easy areas. I gave you a lot of tips within those 3 areas that you can work with to, as a C-level executive or as someone who's trying to get a C-level executive engaged, you can use to influence adoption of the project. Not just adoption for adoption's sake, but you're really influencing the value of your investment into CRM And as a result of you setting that example, you're actually creating more value because you're starting to create more adoption as well. Okay, so that was our content for the day today. I don't know if we've had any questions. I'll put kind of a wrap-up slide here and ask our Click Dimensions partners if there's anything that that came in from the audience that I didn't see. I don't think I see anything in the chat I'm looking at.
There is here. So it came directly to us. So if you don't mind, I could ask him if that's okay, Jeff.
Perfect, thank you.
Sure. So a few came in. The first one is, it says that our project leader isn't a C-level executive, but he is a line of business leader and is engaged at a very detailed level. So one example being that he has international phone number standards. So would you say this is an appropriate level of engagement since he isn't in the C-suite?
Great question. It's a challenging one, and it's probably an it depends, but let me kind of give you a couple of scenarios to think about. Thank you for asking it, by the way, and keep them coming if you have others. So what I would say is if that individual is in fact your owner, right, your project owner, that is way more detail than you want a project owner to get into, right? They really have no business in getting into something about international standards or phone standards or something like that. I mean, maybe specifying that that's an important requirement might be, but getting into designing algorithms or defining exactly what security roles need to be, or that's just too much detail for someone who's a project owner, right? The business expert, the subject matter expert in the business, that might be an indicator that that they might just be a detailed and somewhat controlling person, and that might be challenging, or it might be that they've lost some faith in what's going on with the project because of some struggles in the past, and you need to win some of that back. But if they're truly the project owner, whether they're at the C-level or not, that's too much detail. Now, if there's another person who's the owner, and this is more of an interested business party who's a little more detail inclined, it might be one of your power user managers, maybe. I think it's still kind of getting over towards the risky area, but maybe. Great question. Any others?
Yeah, Jeff, there's actually another one that came in. It's a tough one. You ready?
Yep.
All right. So it says our leadership team has approved our project, but is completely unengaged in anything other than hearing user feedback. So what would be your recommendation on, how could you suggest that we get them involved?
Yeah, so I won't tell you I've got a silver bullet for this. I mean, sometimes it's just kind of like people are people, right? You can only do so much to influence them. But a couple of things from similar situations to this. First of all, if you absolutely can't get them engaged, but they are listening to user feedback, one of the things you can do is start to take more control of that user feedback. And I'd mentioned when I talked about planning, potentially using surveying. Click Dimensions has a great surveying tool built right in. So if you're on the Click platform, that's a great way to do your electronic surveys. But do your surveys in such a way that you go from just plain user feedback, because user feedback that leadership hears is hardly ever positive, right? You're always going to be pass fail, either nothing, okay, you're okay, or people are complaining and it's a problem. So you take control and do some user surveys and do benchmarks. So you can say, hey, leadership, here's what we've been hearing from users. And so we're focusing on these two, we can't do everything, but we're focusing on these two pain points. And there's a whole gap analysis thing you can do to really analyze this, but suffice it to say, try to identify the bigger areas of feedback. And then plan to go back 6, 12 months later when you're doing annual planning and say, hey, leadership, by the way, here's what this analysis said a year ago, and now here's what it says now, we've improved. Because what leaders who only listen to end user feedback tend to do is they remember those stories for a long time. Sometimes they're still telling each other. So you've solved something 12 months ago, and they're kind of like, well, users still say they can't search CRM to find what they're looking for. Like, I know that's solved, but how do I resolve, how I speak to that? That's one way that you can speak to that. So that's one possible way. The other way is, figure out, well, how do you engage with them on their terms? Is it as simple as, can I or someone on our team just sit down with you for 30 minutes to interview you to understand what it is you hope to get out of CRM? Or would you consider coming to this work session? Or whatever it is, but what's their terms, what's their language, and how can you go to them on the platform where they want to have that conversation, right? They're the leader, right? So you need to figure out where they are. So couple of suggestions. None of them are a silver bullet, but maybe one of those will help a little bit.
Yeah, great suggestions, Jeff. That's actually all the questions that were
Okay.
asked in chat.
Thank you, James. Really appreciate it. And thank you, by the way, so much to Click Dimensions for sponsoring this session. We've had a long, great relationship with them. If you don't know Click Dimensions, get introduced. If you do, they're always doing new and exciting things. Get up to speed with their product roadmap because you need to make that a feeder for your CRM roadmap. I'd mentioned the book. So if you'd like to get a copy of Trisha's book, Revenue Engineering, there's my contact information. Ping me on email and just let me know. I'd love to get a copy of Revenue Engineering. I got another book out there called The Luck Principle. I won't offer that for free today. You can go get that from Amazon. It's so easy that even an executive can understand it. So that's just a general vision for digital workplace. And I've got a lot of ebooks and links too. So if you're in a position of pain with CRM and you think, I want that CPR for CRM, tell me more about why they fail and what I can do about it. We've got a great ebook on that. You can hit our website to get it. You can ping me and just ask me for it. There's my contact information. I'm glad to get that for you. And of course, this is what we do. We implement CRM and SharePoint and Teams customer and employee engagement projects all the time, whether it's business consulting or hardcore hands-on development and all points in between. That's C5 Insight's business model, and we'd love to help you in your journey if that's something that's of interest to you. James, I don't know if there's anything you guys want to say, but thank you everyone for attending, and thank you Click Dimensions so much for having me today.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Jeff. It was great to have you.
Bye-bye, everybody.